3 minutes, then we need to start because we might be running out of time as well. So yep, so at least we should have around 100 students, then we can start our lectures today. Thank you. All right, so I believe this is a good time for us to start the lectures. Again, welcome back. So today basically is week 8, right? So we are still discussing on the implementations. So to remind you guys that next Friday basically is your deliverable 2 submissions. So later on, we will also make an announcement about, for example, like you need to frozen your repo and also frozen your development by tech time, because right after the D2, right, then we need to proceed to D3 already. So just to remind you guys, so you have 1 more week to work on your D2. Okay. All right. So today, basically what we are going to talk about is also related to secure coding. So although I cannot confirm what kind of languages that you are currently using for the project, right? But in general, I can still give you some abstract idea on how actually you can ensure that your secure coding at least is to fulfill the standard, or at least you know what to do. So this is actually the main focus for this lecture. All right. So to begin with, right? So I need to see whenever it's recorded. Yes, I think it's recorded. Okay. So I believe that some of the team are using SQLite, right? So actually, the news is just coming out today. Is that there's a 22-year-old vulnerability reported in widely used SQLite database. So this is actually one of the things that I'm going to cover in today's lectures as well, which is also implementations of secure coding. So in case if you're using SQLite database, right? So you need to make sure that your version has to be above 1 point, has above 3.39.2. So otherwise, your SQLite database might be facing this 20-year-old vulnerabilities, which can manage to crash your SQLite database. So again, we always have some news just coming out today or yesterday or actually for a week. Then that actually is something that is very important for your project, because you need to make sure that the third-party libraries or the plugin or the framework that you're using has to be up to date, or actually you have to update it to the latest version, so that actually it will not be affected by those newly come out or 0-day vulnerabilities. All right. Okay. So first of all, right, I don't know if any one of you know about what is leap seconds, or you can give a thumbs up if you know about it, or if you can give a thumbs down if you don't know about what is leap seconds. Do you hear about these leap seconds before? So maybe I just share with you. So there's a thumbs up, then some of you knows about it, right? So that's actually news just in July saying that including Meta, Google, Amazon wants to put an end to leap seconds. So why actually there's a leap second? Because right, the Earth actually the rotation speed is not always constant, and sometimes it will be faster and sometimes it will be slower. That means that if it is slower, we need extra 1 second so that actually it is still fulfilling the correct rotation of the Earth, right? Okay, so in fact, what actually it is that so because it is actually has been discussed for more than a decade, is that the spinning or rotation speed of the Earth is not controllable, right? And then actually it is the case that we need to adjust the clock from time to time so that it can still maintain and catch up the rotation speed of the Earth to maintain the 356 days per year, right? So actually, how currently people, or at least at this period of time, how we are going to handle the leap second is, I don't know if you saw this beforehand, right? So right now, the official US time is 25, 59, and 60 seconds. So how many of you, just curious, right? So how many of, because you guys should be already you should be still during the implementation phase, right? How many of you use regular expression to check the time input? Can you give a thumbs up? No one is using regular expression to check the time input by the user, is it? Okay, or am I still alive, or you guys are still alive or not? Okay, maybe just give me a thumbs up if you're still alive. Okay, at least still alive. Okay, so again, that actually comes to a situation that if some of the team are using regular expression to check the input of the users whenever they input the time correctly. And what I'm here to tell you is that in fact this is a valid input. It's a valid input if it is the leap seconds. If that actually there's a 60 seconds if it is a leap year. So that actually is an issue that sometimes regular expression might cause some problem if the time actually is not correct. If you always assume that the clock will only be 59 seconds instead of 60 seconds. But at this period of time, right, leap seconds is still appear, and if you are using regular expression to check the time, you actually need to cater for these extreme situations. Otherwise, if the users actually submit something or actually input this time, and then your system will say is incorrect, then it will become a problem in some cases, which I'm going to share later on. So another issue is that because some of the team might already put their code on GitHub, right? And then if their repo actually is a public repo, so I'm just telling you that if the source code is managed to find by the hackers, right, it might be the problem that it can consider as a data branch, because if someone can actually get your source code and they understand how things work, or actually you put your secret or your SSH tokens or your Amazon AWS EC2 tokens on your repo, right? Basically, they can use those credentials and tokens to access your services or actually be able to control something that is related to your applications. So I believe that this question should be already asked by Prof. Tran before, is that whenever anyone is using one password, and then why or why not? So I up to this moment, any one of you are still using those password management tool for managing your password, even the one that is using the Chrome password manager to store the password. Anyone, thumbs up if you're still using those, or thumbs down, you are not using those at all. Yeah, I'm just using, oh, okay, still a lot of you guys are still using the password manager. So again, it is secure or not is mainly because the next story that I want to share with you is also released last week, right? So last month, sorry. So in fact, Microsoft Teams store the authentication token as clear test in Windows, Linux, and Mac. So there's a security analyst company find that there's several security vulnerabilities in the desktop app of the Microsoft Teams, and then they are actually storing the authentication tokens and accounts with multiple authentications, and even with the multi-factor authentication is turned on, but they as Microsoft Teams are still storing the authentication token in plain text in Windows, Linux, and Mac. So maybe I would just quickly go through what this vulnerability is about, right? Because up to this moment, Microsoft Teams are still not fixing it yet, because Microsoft Teams is an Electron app, meaning that actually the app is running a browser in Windows. So that means that it is still using the web technology to build up the applications, but however, it is actually considered as a standalone application. It looks like a standalone application, but however, the entire things is still implemented by the web technologies. And that's actually a problem that Electron does not support encryptions or protected file by default. So I highlight by default, right? That means that by default, it is not turned on. And then there's a company find that the Microsoft team are trying to Microsoft team basically is trying to find a way to remove deactivated account from INF. So because they are trying to find a way to deactivate the accounts of the client app, but substantially what they found is that they found there's a IDB, which is a database files, which is storing the access token in clear text. So after the security analysts try to discover a little bit more about what the content is stored in the database file, they found that because it is an Electron app, right? That means that the underlying technology is still a web technologies, and they are still using cookies to store the information. And guess what they found? Is that they found the cookies folder. Actually, there's a cookie folder that is storing the valid authentication token associated with the account information and also the marketing text. That means that if all the tokens are stored in the cookies file, right, they can manage it they can use the API, and then they are possible to use the API call to send message on behalf of the user. So that means that if someone or if the hacker manages to gain access to your local Microsoft Teams applications, right, they are able to read the SQLite database, to read the cookies database as well. And then they can make use of the cookies to call the API and then send message or react on the message on behalf of you. So this is actually considered as a serious vulnerabilities, because someone can steal your cookies, right? They can call the API on behalf of you or on behalf of the original applications. So what you can see is that token received the attack as test in the attacker personal chat. So that means that they can actually do something, and then they can actually send this code token on behalf of you, and then they can obtain this token, and then they can send message on behalf of you, which is actually extremely critical. So what actually is the most interesting thing is that the reply from Microsoft is that the technique described does not meet our bar of immediate servicing, as it requires an attacker to first gain access to the target network or the target PC. We appreciate the security analyst project's partnership in identifying the responsibility, disclosing this issue, and we'll consider addressing in a future product release. So this is actually how the Microsoft respond. So maybe I just ask you a very simple question as stated in here, right? So if you either you are SE student or IS student, do you accept such reply from Microsoft? Thumbs up if you feel that you accept such reply, or thumbs down you feel that it is unacceptable. No one? So that means that you can still use the same trick to find out the cookies or the access token. Or there's some emoji as well. So that means that they are confused that whenever they accept it or not, because this is something that your D3 are going to do, right? So that's why, will you continue to use MS Teams? That is something that you cannot prevent, right? Some of our lectures or some of the module might still require the use of MS Teams. But what I can tell you here is that this is the reply from Microsoft, whether you accept it or not. But however, this is the reply, and they're saying that they're going to fix it. So using a web framework to develop an app, is it a good practice or not? I will not say a good or bad, right? Because if it is a rapid prototyping or rapid development, using electronic framework is not a bad thing. But however, there's some things like cookies or actually there might be some vulnerabilities that exist in the web framework may still remain if you use those as so to say, if you make it as a standalone application. Okay. So this is why I want to mention these case study before I mention the implementation. Is mainly because these will be the things that you need to consider during your implementation phases. All right. Okay. So next, I also want to, at least I won't require you an answer in here, but however, there's always if it is related to secure software development, especially on the implementation part, there's always a fight or war between open source and closed source. So which one do you prefer, or which one consider as more secure? I believe that that's something that Prof. Chen should already mention about the design principle, right? So closed source may have their own advantage, while open source definitely have also their advantage and disadvantage as well. So why actually we want to make it as open source and closed source? Is it something that when you're doing the implementations, that would be something that you might need to consider, because if you are saying that the team actually develop a very innovative algorithms or machine learning or some of the very sensitive algorithms that you don't want to disclose, or you are actually going to plan for applying a patent or actually is copyright related, right? Then you might consider it as closed source so that no one will know what actually your teams or actually the methodologies are going to work. But however, if you want to make it open source, right, that means there's more contributions from the open source industry or some of the standalone designers or programmers that could help you to improve the security of the applications. So that's why open source and closed source is always the case when we are talking about how we are going to implement an applications. That if you want to open source your whole project, right, will it cause any IP or patent issues, or actually whenever this is more secure or not, this will be something that the team might need to consider during their development phases as well. Okay. So I believe that I already spent around 15 minutes on the case study, so I think it's too much already. So that's why I think it is extremely important for me to talk about the agenda today. It's mostly related to OWASP. But however, in these lectures, what I'm going to talk about is because you are still in the implementation phase. So that is extremely important for me to mention about what actually OWASP, or at least the industry, are trying to propose some methodologies and ideas for you to control the applications, or actually ensure that your implementations at least up to a level that is considered as secure. So I will also mention some cheat sheet and also some of the knowledge framework that you might need to know. Last but not least will be the secure coding practice, because this is actually how we are going to ensure, because you will always ask, right? So Prof. Raymond, so how I can ensure that my coding practice is considered as secure or not? So that's why we need to talk about this secure coding practice quick reference guide, so that you know what is considered as a good practice to ensure that your code is secure or not. Okay, so the first thing that I'm going to discuss for today is the OWASP top 10 proactive controls. So why actually it's called proactive control is because we need to ensure that there should be sufficient control, so to say, control or administrative matters to make sure that we are implementing with particular or certain controls or reasonable control to ensure our requirements, functionalities, the libraries that we are going to use has some kind of controls or quality assurance to make sure that it can mitigate the risks or threats that we mentioned previously. So it is actually very similar to the OWASP top 10 vulnerabilities, but however, this is actually the vice versa, because we always talk about the top 10 vulnerabilities or top 10 web securities vulnerabilities, right? Top 10 proactive control is you can consider as a mitigations or a control to mitigate the top 10 vulnerabilities of web applications. So in fact, that's top 10, right? That means that also from C1 to C10. So unfortunately, I think it is extremely boring for me to introduce from C1 to C10, right? So in this lecture, I will leave you guys to read the details, which I'm going to upload later after these lectures. That in fact, you can also Google this proactive control as well. And I already try to see whenever there are any latest version, but unfortunately, the 2018 seems to me is still the latest version. But you can see, right, the top 10 web securities vulnerabilities is already the 2021 versions. But I don't know why the 2018 of the proactive control still haven't updated yet. But I believe that they should be having a draft right now, but they are going to release one in this year, if I'm not wrong. So what I'm going to mention today, at least I only want to mention 3 of the top 10 proactive controls. One of it is the security frameworks and libraries, which I want to spend time to talk to you about. And the second one is the secure database access. Why I'm going to mention this is also related to SQL injections that I'm going to talk about, right? And then implement secure logging and monitoring, which I believe that not many of you guys are actually working on it at this moment. So that's why I want to spend some time to talk about implementing secure logging and monitoring as well. Okay, so when we talk about the top 10 proactive controls, right? So it is actually quite similar to the top 10 vulnerabilities, but however, it is having the descriptions, and there's a description. So maybe I should use a highlight here. So when you actually take a look with the top 10 proactive control, right? So it always starts with a description. So there's a very high level abstract description on how each of the proactive control has to be implemented. And there's a implementations is how you're going to implement the proactive control, and then followed by the vulnerabilities or risk that is prevented or mitigated by the proactive control. And then the most important things that I always encourage you to read are the references and the tools that can be integrated or introduced in your secure software development. So what actually we need to do is that this best practice actually always come with tools or libraries or reference for you to read, to make sure that your teams, when you're doing the implementations, you need to reference to the proactive control and make sure that you have a proper control of a certain functionalities or actually a certain use case of your applications. So as I mentioned, right, what I want to talk about in this lecture is more on the security frameworks and libraries, because many of your teams are trying to make use of security frameworks and libraries for implementing your applications, right? So I just want to go for a very quick high-level description of how you can leverage, I think the same student that is not unmuting themselves, is it? Okay, I need to mute. All right, okay. Okay, so so I just continue. So a developer basically might not have sufficient knowledge or time. The important thing is the time to properly implement security features, right? Just like you guys, you don't have enough time. So that's why you will always use security frameworks or libraries to accomplish security goals for efficiency and accurately for actually implement a security feature. feature. So again, because you're using libraries or you are using frameworks or plugins, right? The best practice is always the case that how you are going to ensure that the libraries, the framework came from the trusted source, or you just randomly find, because some of you like to randomly find a GitHub repo. If it's a lot of developer is using it, right, you consider as trusted. But however, whenever this is trusted or not is always questionable. So that's the first thing that the team need to ensure is that the libraries framework came from the trusted source or the official websites where you download it or when you use it. How are you going to ensure that it's trusted, or have you validate or verified the checksum of the library or frameworks that you might need to make sure that you have certain kind of controls of those. And then secondly, right? So are you able to create and maintain an inventory of categories of all third-party libraries? It's something that I will always encourage you to have in your D2, right? At least you know what kind of libraries that you use, what version numbers that you're using, or even you use Docker, or you even use the web server technologies, everything. You should have an inventory or categories. Even there's a 0-day vulnerabilities or there's a new vulnerability comes out, right? Then you can immediately find out whenever your applications is affected by these new vulnerabilities or not. So that's something that I always look at is that you having an inventory or you maintain the catalogs. If you're not, then how you ensure that your applications is not vulnerable to those third-party library attacks. So how are you going to proactively keep libraries up to date, which is why CI/CD is important, right? So if your CI/CD have a workflow, then you will always update the latest libraries of your web applications, then it is considered as secure, right? So with the help of choosers if available. So that's why how you ensure that you don't hard code the library the version numbers when you deploy your applications will be something that I always look into. Because if you hard code the version number, right, then how are you ensure that you can update to the latest one with to fix those vulnerabilities? And then reduce attack surface by encapsulating the libraries and expose only required behavior in your applications. Oh, okay, at least I cannot highlight it correctly, but should be okay. So how are you going to reduce the attack surface? I believe that Prof. Tran should already mention numbers of it in the security design lectures, right? So I'm not going to go into the details, but I hope you still remember how you can minimize the attack surface by using the libraries as well. So, and then because actually it has to be focused on, it has to prevent or mitigate the vulnerabilities, right? So it is actually integrating the top 10 2021 ASIL6 vulnerable and outdated components. So this is why we need to use the proactive control to mitigate the top 10 vulnerabilities that Prof. Tran mentioned in the first half of the lectures. So because our lab, right, if you still remember the last lab we mentioned about, or this lab that we mentioned about the OWASP dependency check, right? So this is why we need to introduce these kind of tools in our Jenkins CI/CD workflow, is that it is a tool for checking whenever you are using the latest version of the libraries, plugin or frameworks, so that it is trying to detect properly, disclose the vulnerability and dependency. So this is why it is important to include or integrate dependency check in your CI/CD workflow. So I believe that you guys are already implementing the dependency check in your project, right? I hope so. If not, then make sure you need to do it in this week's lab and next week lab as well. You still have around 6 hours to complete your application development. So just to remind you guys. And then there's also another tool called the Retire.js as well, is to scan the JavaScript library. But unfortunately, I don't think this library is still updating their repo at this period of time. But however, you can also use other automation to check what kind of library that you're currently using for your applications. So for the dependency check, why actually is famous, it's also because it is also maintained by OWASP. So that's the things that why we encourage you guys to integrate OWASP dependency check in your Jenkins. Is mainly because it is actually a software composition analysis tool to check whenever the libraries or plugin that uses with are there any vulnerability or not, or should you actually upgrade to the latest version or not as well. So if you have time, you can also take a look with the OWASP dependency check repo to see the details, and also the retire.js as well. So in fact, you can also integrate it in your Jenkins timeline if you if you follow the steps that is provided. So actually there should be an image on Docker Hub, or actually you can just directly integrate in your Jenkins pipeline as well to do a scanning to see whenever your applications are using vulnerable JavaScript plugin or not. So this is extremely important because you need to check whenever there's new versions of your libraries or plugin that you have to use or not. Okay, so the next thing that I want to cover is the secure database access. So this is also the C3. So what actually is how to secure your database access, just like I mentioned about the SQLite database, because that vulnerability just came out today. Although actually it should be fixed in July, but I'm not so sure if you need to take a look whenever you are using the latest version or not. So this is actually a mixture between whenever you are using a vulnerable component as well as securing your database access. So because secure database access includes secure the communications, the authentications, query, and configurations. So that means that it's not only securing the query that you think is just securing to prevent SQL injection attack, but however, you need to also ensure that the communications cannot be sniffed by other attackers, and also how you authenticate whenever there's a legitimate users that is going to utilize or make use or to query your database. Last but not least, you need to make sure that your configuration has to be secure as well. So how actually you are going to implement of best practice is that, for example, like communications, right? The only thing that the things that we have to do is to use encrypted security channel. The authentications, we should be using proper authentication method with a secure channel, and then we should not always use the root credential. We should have a limited users credential, which can only use, for example, like which can only access through a fixed IP address, or they can only access certain table with select and update feature, but not delete and drop permission. That will be something that we would look into when you're coming up with your D2, the security implementations. And then the queries, I don't think I need to spend into the detail because everyone will know about that. Is related to SQL injection attack. That means that it is related to query parameterization. Okay, so you need to use, for example, like prepare statement, or you need to use procedure, store the procedure, which I will mention later on. So last but not least will be the secure configuration, a hardening technique, right? For example, like follow available standard guidelines and benchmark to ensure that your configurations of the database has to be secure. So what kind of vulnerabilities prevented is the injection that you should already know about it when Prof. Chen mentioned about the top 10 web vulnerabilities, right? And the reference, which we are also going to talk a little bit about it in later on, is the cheat sheet series. So you need to know how to use query parameterizations, SQL injection prevention cheat sheet, and database security cheat sheet as well. And also last but not least, there's something called Poppy tables as well for you to understand how actually SQL injection works, which is also prepared for SE students as well. All right, so the last proactive control that I want to mention, so I only choose 3 instead of I mentioned all 10 of it, because if I mention all 10 of it, right, I basically spend all the lectures on mentioning the proactive control, which is not my purpose, because I suspect you can read by on your own or the team's own, right? So the implementations of secure locking and monitoring is that the main focus will always be 3 things. The first thing is the locking, so that your teams, the developers is able to do debugging and also do diagnostic purpose to ensure that how you're going to fix some bugs or vulnerabilities of your applications. Secondly, will be the security locking to ensure that there should be some security information, so that at least your lock can somehow to show whenever someone is trying to keep logged into the same account, or they are trying to to repeat some similar actions, which seems to be abnormal. For example, like if you are a e-commerce applications, if there's a user keep purchasing the same product every second, right, then your log should be able to show this kind of abnormal activities to see whenever your administrators has to do some further actions to prevent those or not. Last but not least is that because you're doing DevOps, right, it is actually good for monitoring, so that you have a live review of the applications to see if suddenly if there's a very high level, or there's a level 7 or HTTPS level of attacks of your web applications, at least the monitoring tools can be able to show this kind of abnormal activities for you to take actions or not. So security locking can be used for fitting to intrusion detection system, or nowadays we always like to use AI to see whenever we can detect some abnormality of the log or not. And also we need to do some forensic analysis. If you manage to log the IP address of who are using your applications, then you can do some forensic investigations. Last but not least is that you might need to satisfying the regularity compliance requirements. Imagine that if you want to apply some of the certifications like the ISO 27001, or you need to fulfill the what is it called? The PDSSS, right? The payment. I can't remember the detailed form of the payment security standard, right? So then you might need to have sufficient log to show that you can be able to log those as illegal or abnormal activities. Yeah, PCI DSS, correct. Yeah, thanks for reminding. I can't remember the PCI DSS, right? Okay. Hi, Pro. So there's a question. Hi, Pro. I see a screenshot of the Elasticsearch. Are we going to implement the use of Elasticsearch, or is just an example? It is just an example for you. So because remember, right, we are not focusing on the ops as of now. So we only focus on doing the coding and also the testing, right? So the deployment and the ops, I don't think we have enough time to go through it. But this is just an illustration on how actually if it is becoming an operations, then you need to find a way to feed the log to Elasticsearch or some monitoring or intrusion detection system, so that your ops can see those live log of your applications. Okay. All right, so secure locking and design and implementations is something that you might also need to aware is that you need to also encode and validate if there's any dangerous character before locking and to prevent log injection attack. That may be extremely difficult for SE students to understand, but for IS students, they might know, right? They might write something, they might write a shell code in the log and then they want to execute it, or they rewrite a SQL query in the log to see whenever there's any remote code executions that some, actually they can make use of the log to execute something. So, but however, this is something that not only your applications, but you need to also do string escape, or actually you need to prevent the log will be also locking some of the dangerous code or characters so that the attacker may be able to make use of. And then the very important things that I always need to remind you guys is do not log sensitive information, because when I was doing secure code auditing, right, I actually can see some log will actually log the username as well as the plain text password when the user are trying to register for an account. And then I said, wow, okay, you log everything in the log. Although you are saying that you encrypt everything in your database, right? No one can decrypt it except the user. But however, how I can actually find out the user information is that I can retrieve the log, then I can find the plain text password and the username. Then it doesn't make any sense, right? Your database storing everything is encrypted and you're telling me that everything is protected. But however, everything I can find in the log, then that will be ridiculously, that's something that's ridiculous, right? So it's ridiculously dangerous. So that's why I always need to mention, do not sensitive information, and it might violate the PDPA as well. And then the next thing that some of the team might also need to aware is that the log integrity. So how can you ensure that the attacker cannot retrieve the log and to see whenever they can find any sensitive information? So you need to make sure the log can only access by a certain applications, and if possible for those archive log whenever you need to encrypt it or not. Okay, so there's a question, Prof, when must the team freeze any change of the VM web applications, which we will be announcing tomorrow as well on the IRMS. So by right, once you submit the D2, you should focus on everything. So that means that it's just same deadline as your D2. Is that once we approach the D2 deadline, then everything has to be frozen. All right. So no worries, we will make an announcement later on tomorrow, then you basically will know. So because after you do the implementations, no, I think unfortunately, because you can see the D3 deadlines is also approaching, right? So I don't know, because actually D3 is also a hard deadline. So if we extend D2, that means that the deadline for you to work on D3 will be also limited as well. But we will mention more details of the D3 in next lecture, but not this lecture. So no worries about D3 first, but however your D2, you just focus on D2 first, so to say. We will see how things go. We can see how things go, just to let you know, right? Because you can see all the deadline, right? We always tell you guys the deadline at the very beginning of this module. So that's why, and I think Prof Chen already told you about that. The D3 basically is a hard deadline as well. So we'll see whenever we can extend to Sunday or not. Okay. But again, so I just continue the secure locking. So basically forward the log to a distributed system to a central secure locking service as well. And nowadays, because people are trying to also put the log in a blockchain so that no one can alter the log as well. But however, this idea is still relatively new. So nowadays, the practice is still there should be a centralized secure storage for the log. But later on, I don't know, because they are saying that there's some research or some industry is saying that they want to store all these kind of log into the blockchain, so to say. Last but not least will always be the PDPA. You need to ensure that your log actually should not store sensitive information of a user. So for secure locking libraries, right? Although I put a log4j question mark, I believe that most of you should have about the log4j vulnerabilities. So again, I put a question mark, but however, this is still a so-called secure locking library as well. But again, in your applications, right, I assume that all of the team should be using some locking library to store your log, or you're using Python to store your log, right? Then you might also need to show how your implementations of loggings to ensure those are secure or not. So this is something that that I would expect to see, so to say. So okay, so up to this moment, so I already finished, I can only say I only finished 3 top 10 proactive controls. Up to this moment, any questions about that, these three proactive controls that is related to your implementations? All right, so if no questions, I believe that all of you are still with me. So the next topic that I want to go through is the cheat sheet series that every one of you might be already quite familiar with. But however, I still need to mention it because this is also related to your implementation. And then the reference that you always can consider is the cheat sheet series. So again, this is also for SE students to understand about how you can ensure your implementation is secure or not. So the OAuth cheat sheet series is to provide a security guidance on a specific security topics. So we are not going to talk about the defined security requirements because that is already being covered in the first half. But however, what we are going to mention basically is so in these lectures, right, we only focus on 2 of the cheat sheet series because there's in total 78 cheat sheets and actually keep increasing, so to say. But however, what we are going to cover today is that there's actually 2 cheat sheets I would like to cover, which will be the most common cheat sheet that you guys might need to reference or you need to actually take note, will be the input validations and also the SQL injection prevention cheat sheet. So why actually they are important? Because your application always have CRUD, right? CRUD. Then for sure that you need to do input validation for your input for the users. And whenever you want to put into the database, right, SQL seems to be the very common practice that you need to communicate with the database. So that's why that's extremely important for me to mention these 2 cheat sheets so that at least you know how to implement these 2 implementations or functions correctly. So for the input validation cheat sheet, so what actually, to give you a quick glance, is that input validations to ensure only properly formed the data is entering the workflow in an information system and preventing malformatted data from persisting into the database and check the malfunctions of the various downstream components. So what actually I want to emphasize in this input validation cheat sheet is that, remember Prof. Chen mentioned about the design principle, right? So the design principle, that's a one principle I hope you still remember, is defense in depth. What is meaning of defense in depth is that we cannot rely on one particular functions module or plugin to do all the checking of a particular features. For example, like because many of you ask whenever you can use a web application firewalls, right? I believe that these questions is being asked in many of the previous lab before. So our answers is that we need to ensure that your applications, at least your front end and back end, should also do the input validations, but not you throw all the responsibilities to the web application firewall. So during the testing phase, right, the QA team will ask the team to disable the web application firewall to see whether they can perform to actually inject some cross-site scripting and SQL injections. Otherwise, if you're saying that your web application firewall is the only defense for injection, right, it doesn't make any sense. That means that if the firewall, if the web application firewall is not working at all, then your application is vulnerable to all kinds of attacks, which is not acceptable. So that's why you can see here, right? So there should be a front-end validations to ensure that your first name, your last name, your email, and your client number. So to see whenever you need to, at least in the first phase, the client side should have a form of validations. Next, your back end, once the user submit the form, there's another defense to validate the same things again to make sure that even your first level of defense won't work. If there's another levels of defense in the back end side, you will also check whether the input is correct or not, and subsequently for the database as well. So that's why it should happen as early as possible in the data flow, and preferably as soon as the data is received from the external party. So that's why every layer there should be some kind of validation of the input to ensure that if the first defense can be bypassed or compromised, there's still a second level of defense which will do the same checking and validations again. So again, it should not be used as the primary method of preventing SSS SQL injections of other attacks as well. So it should not. That means that you should not be using this input validations as a primary record to prevent cross-site sniffing and SQL injections. You should have other library, you should have other functions or backend features that can check SQL injections, cross-site scripting, and other kind of attack as well. Wow, I spent 5 minutes on this one slide. Okay, I think I need to speed up a little bit. So again, data type validators, again, there's a lot of validators like the Django validators, Apache common validators. That will be the framework that we always say. There's some common frameworks and library to help you to do the validations instead of you implement on your own, right? There should be some validators library and framework that you might need to use to do the input validations. And validations again, JSON schema is something that I always find that the teams are missing. Is that you always trust all kinds of JSON schema. Even I inject one of the key value pairs, right? It can easily directly go into your data JSON or NoSQL database without any validation and checking. So and then I can subsequently conduct a cross-site scripting attack using the malformat JSON schema. So I don't know. So that means that I don't know whenever you are doing validations of your JSON schema or not, but this is something that you might need to also take into the considerations, especially you are using JSON or XML as an input for your applications. Type conversion is also the things, right? Because if you want to pass an integer, you want to pass a double, then you need to handle the exception correctly. Otherwise, there might be some doubles or there's a dot, right? Then your application might not work, or actually we will throw an exceptions, which you might also need to take care about. And maximum and minimum value range checks is also something considered as input validations. Remember the username length and the password length, right? If your applications is not supporting more than 256 character of your password, right, then you need to do a range check as well, and you should have a minimum length check for the username, right? Otherwise, then you can see in our Zoom, right? Some of our students use dot as a username, and some just use emoji as your username. Just curious, your application support you emoji as your username or not? Or is your applications are able to check Unicode as well or not? Will be something that you might need to consider about. Otherwise, then I can always use emoji to see whenever I can create some funny, interesting thing in your applications. And last but not least, what I want to mention, because today we mentioned about regular expressions, right? So regular expression is something that you might always need to make use of, but however, you need to make use it wisely, or you need to ensure that your regular expressions, your regex basically need to write correctly so that it can check and validate most of the input from the users. Okay, so next, what I'm going to cover, I still have some pointer option automatic. Okay, so again, there's something called the allow list and bulk list as well. So because it is also a common mistake that you might need to bulk list validations in order to try to detect possibilities, because actually there's a story, in fact, because you will always want to bypass, for example, like the colon characters or a double quote characters in the input, for example, like first name, last name. Why you want to do that is that if you are IS student, right, using the code character is always the case that you want to perform SQL injections to see whenever you can conduct SQL injection or not. But however, you know, right, some names actually have a colon. And then if you try to just make use of, if there's a colon, then you don't allow the user to input, right? Some of the case might not use because there's some name actually have some special characters inside. And if you try to blacklist those characters, a number of users might not be able to use these characters, but however, this is their real name, that will become a problem, all right? So that's why you might consider either to use allowed list or block list, but however, you might need to make sure that you need to use it wisely because sometimes we might actually need a special characters as an input for for some certain inbox as well, which is something that is extremely important that I want to mention to you guys, instead of just block all the special characters. Some of the cases like the first name or the full name, we really need to use those special characters, although you will think seems to be a SQL injections, all right? So again, that means that your regular expressions or when you're trying to validate such input, right, you need to ensure that you might need to handle these special cases or not, because it might also affect the normal use of the applications. All right, next is that validating free-form Unicode text as well. Is that just okay to ensure that you guys are still awake or I'm still alive, right? Any guys, any teams allowing emoji as a password? Thumbs up if you allow emoji as a password. Thumbs down, you not implement it at all, or you can have a emoji, explosion emoji to say, oh, I never think about it. So it's just a thumbs down, right? It's like explosion. So why don't you allow emoji password? That's always my questions, right? So emoji as your password seems to be more secure in a sense, right? So are you allowing emoji Unicode as a password is always the question that I want to ask. If you allow it, then how are you going to implement it? If you're not allowing it, how are you going to validate those free-form Unicode tests is something that I always want you guys to think about, because all the inputs, right, you're assuming that emoji is considered as a legitimate input nowadays, like a text box or even a username. So you need to find a way to normalize it. So for the validations of free-form input text, right, there should be some normalizations to ensure that canonical encoding is used across all the text and no invalid characters are present. Characters categorized allow listening to ensure that actually you are allowing the correct emoji and characters. And you might also have an individual character allow listening to ensure that if you don't want to confuse the users at all. So that's something that I always want to ask you guys, right? For SE student, I think you should already know how to implement a website with support of emoji, right? So for IS student, you consider password as an emoji will be something that I believe that in your implementations, I hope to see that there's some implementation to address this kind of issues, all right? So for the regular expressions, right? Because we mentioned regular expressions in the very early to this lecture or very early slides in these lectures that we need to handle, for example, like leap seconds. So in fact, there's also one cheat sheet, which I don't want to go into the details, but there's a OWASP validations regular expression repository that help you to come up or find the correct regular expressions to do regulation. So instead of writing your own regular expressions, it is also a common practice for you to use the repositories from OWASP to ensure that you find the correct regular expressions to validate your applications. But however, because I don't know, right? I don't know if I need to spend the details because I don't know if IS students, when you study your web securities and your mobile securities, right? The Prof. Wei Han, Prof. Jeannie, Prof. V mentioned about regular expression denial of service attack. Can you give a thumbs up if they already mentioned that I can quickly go through so that SE student won't be confused, or you give me a thumbs down if I need to at least spend some time or a few minutes on what is regular expressions attacks. Oh, there's one thumbs down already. Got any? I hope there's a thumbs up. Oh, two thumbs down already. That means that so you haven't learned anything about regular expression attack in WebSec or mobile security. Okay, all right. So then I spend some time on it then. So, but however, when I want to mention regular expression, because this is some kind of regular, some form of validations of the input, right? So the first thing that I always want to mention is that input validations in summary, in general, has to be applied to all kind of input data at minimum, so that each of the input users have a validation to ensure that there will be no attacker is trying to utilize that input to conduct some attacks. And then you also need to define a allowed set of characters to be accepted and define a minimum and maximum length of the data so that you will not overflow your database data field storage. All right. So just give you an example, I just copy and paste from the OWASP regular expression regex repository. For example, like if you want to validate a zip code or actually a postal code, right? This should be the regular exception that you need to validate, that you can use to do the validation. And for example, like validate US state selections from a drop-down menu, that you also need to have a regular expressions, right? So make sure you can write, or actually you find a correct validations of regular expressions to validate the particular input to ensure that at least there's some kind of validations the user won't be able to utilize that input for attacks. But however, so what I want to mention about regular expression denial of service attack is this, because there's one previous 2019 regular expression attack that is done on Cloudflare, although actually it's not conducted by the attackers, but there's a misconfigurations by the network engineers on the firewall rules on their IDS on Cloudflare database and Cloudflare firewalls and routers. So what actually the regular expression denial of service attack is that because the fact that most regular expression implementations may reach extreme situations that cause them to work extremely slowly. Because in your regular expressions, or usually my practice is that I want to always write an extremely complex regular expression to check all kinds of possibilities and input or situations, right? But however, I don't know if you guys think about it, right? If your regular expression is longer or have different end or operation, or actually the input for checking using the regular expression is relatively long or large text, right? The performance of the regular expressions will become slower and slower if your regex is extremely complex or your input is extremely long. So what actually it is the case is that if you allow the user to input a large amount of text input, and you are using regular expression as a form of validations, right? It can enter into an extreme situation that your applications will hang for a very long time. This is so-called regular expressions denial of service attack, is to slow down your applications, to cause problem of your web applications as well. So how actually it works, right? So consider this regular expression pattern. So I believe that you should know about this pattern, right? So that means that is I can have many numbers of A, and then I can have some symbol, some string append and behind. So in fact, this regular expression can be represented as a I think you should already learn about what is directed graph and directed flow diagrams, right? So this is some kind of non-deterministic finite diagram that I hope you should still remember in your data structure algorithms, right? So that means that I will check A whenever there's how many numbers of A, and then I need to check whenever it satisfies this particular regular expressions. So the problem is, if the input is just A and X, right? In fact, there's already 16 possibility paths of the above graph. But if your input is relatively long, there's actually 65536 possible paths for actually when we need to validate using this particular regular expression. Then you can imagine, right? If my input is longer, then the time I need to validate using this regular expressions will become exponentially long. So that means that actually then subsequently my web applications will hang if it is the case. Because why this become the regex denial of service attack become a problem is because the regex processing engine, the regex regular expression processing engine will use a feature called backtracking to actually backtrack whenever this particular string will still satisfy through different possible input. If there's a mismatch, right, that means that I cannot use this this input is not fulfilling this particular regular expression. And then this feature actually will create an extremely long running loop because they are exponentially long path that they need to export and check whenever it satisfies this regular expression or not. That will become a problem. Why this is called regular expression denial of service is because of this. So I don't know. That means that even you're using regular expressions to check your application's input, right? You need to ensure that this kind of problem will not be appear, or the input you have to limit it as well. So secondly, there's something also called the evil regex as well, is that so what is called a evil regex is that a regular expression patterns called evil regex, if it can get stuck on a crafted input. For example, like you can see, right, or the A and plus, that means that I can have exponential numbers of A, or actually I can have different characters and I need to validate whenever there's a lot of possibilities that I need to validate. So you can also try on your own. If you try the input as A exclamation mark, right, then you can see involved if you want to use the web validate regular expressions validators. The output actually might take a very ridiculously long amount of time to validate the input. So this will become a problem, and you need to manage to take care whenever your applications or someone in your teams is trying to write this kind of evil regular expression or not, which I would say you might need to validate whenever your regular expressions is correctly implemented or not. So why actually evil regex attack is something that is also will cause some problem. It's because if your regular expressions first, you might also want to handle it in the browser, which is the client side, right? Imagine that if you are doing the validations in the client side, that means that there's a possibility that your web browser will hang in the first place. Then your applications will crash, right? That's the first problem. Imagine that because if your web application firewall or proxy is handling this kind of regular expression, right, then no one can access your applications. Or last but not least, right, if your IIS, your web applications is handling, right, it will slow down your performance of the applications, and subsequently, if you implement in the database level, it will also slow down your insertion or selection speed of your database as well. So that's why if you use regex, because it's not only the client side, but everywhere you might consider to use regular expressions, right? Then you need to make sure that the team are using regular expressions in a correct manner. Okay, so Okay, so I believe that is a good time for me to take a break. So let's take a 5 minute break, and then when we come back, we need to talk about the sickle injection prevention cheat sheet. All right, so let's take a 5 minute break. Thank you so much, guys. All right, so I think it's a good time for me to continue the SQL injection because I still have around 20 slides. Okay, I hope I should be able to finish on time. So so because we just finished covering the input validations cheat sheet, right? Another very important cheat sheet that I want to mention today is the SQL injection prevention cheat sheet. So again, how actually you are going to, I believe that some of you should already, wait me a second. So for SQL injection prevention, right? Again, there's several options for you to prevent because previously when we mentioned about the input validations, some of them will be done in the front end side and some of them can be done, basically has to be done in both front end and back end side. But for SQL injection prevention, right, usually it has to be done in back end side, so to say, because there's actually a direct connections in your web applications to the database. So the primary defense is that it is also quite straightforward. I believe some of you should be quite familiar with, is that, for example, like prepare statements. So with parameterize the queries, right, to ensure that you're not directly execute the SQL queries. But the one that I always like to use, or I commonly use, I would say, in my common practice when I use SQL database, right, I usually use store procedure. In case if you don't know what store procedure is that you will define the SQL query as a function and store into the database. So your applications, basically, there will be no SQL queries or there will be no prepare statement in your web application server. But however, you are calling a functions in the database with the parameter or actually input, so that the one who execute the query basically will be the database. In your applications, you might only see a store procedure name like insert records, for example, like create accounts. Then basically your application itself won't disclose the parameter or the field of the database if you are going to use store procedures in your applications. So that's why I always strongly encourage, if it is a secure coding practice, never ever store any SQL queries, even if a prepare statement in your web applications. Because if someone, right, if your web applications is able to decompile, which I'm going to mention in the statistical analysis lectures, then they can actually somehow guess or they can find out what kind of database query or actually what field that your database is storing, which will become an issue. And then allow these input validations as well, and accepting all users supply the input. That will be something that you might need to consider about. So you might always need to use the combinations of the defense to ensure that no attacker can perform SQL injection attack to your database. So additional defense that I always need to mention is that this is extremely important, and I believe that a numbers of team might always forgot, is that they always use the root credentials and store in their configurations, which I always say that you should limit to a normal user database account, and then with only the accessibilities of a certain table with certain execution commands, like they can only do select, or they can only do update, or they can only do insert instead of delete, drop, or ground privilege. The only the query that the command that they always forgot is that they can actually grant themselves a privilege, and then it will become an issue. And then again, performing allow this input validation as a second defense is always the case that you might need to consider as well. So when you're doing your implementations of how to protect the database queries. So for SE students, right, because you might not know about the concept of what is SQL injections, right? So I would strongly encourage and suggest that if you have time, you can also go to this Bobby tables to understand how you're going to implement SQL injection, or how to prevent SQL injection, or how a SQL injection can be conducted as well. But for IS student, I believe that you should know about it, right? So I don't want to mention the detail, but if you have time, I think the Bobby tables will always give you an idea is that how, if it is a Python, for example, like you cannot use this way to implement the SQL data to do the database query, right? Then you might need to use, for example, like updates. Instead, you need to use the way, for example, update people set percent name, and then that will be actually prevent some kind of SQL injections for your implementations. All right. Okay, up to this moment, right? Are there any questions about the OWASP security cheat sheet? Okay, so seems there's no questions, right? Then I will just continue on the security knowledge framework called the SKF, because this is also this knowledge framework actually also consider best practice code example showing you how to prevent hackers from gaining access and run exploit in your applications. So that's why I also want to spend some time on it as well. Okay, so for example, like why I want to mention this is because I believe that numbers of teams are using Flash, right? So that's why if you want to ensure that the team are following the security implementation, or you are actually have a security good practice, right? Then the things that you might always need to refer to is the OWASP security knowledge framework, so that you understand how if you're using Flash, right, how you're going to execute a SQL query, input validations, and prevent directly listening, and also random number password generation as well. So this will be something that you might need to take a look with. So I won't go into the details, but however, I hope that during the lab sections, the team should actually go through this knowledge framework to ensure that your implementations, at least you're following the example that's given by the best practice, proactive control, the cheat sheet, and the secure knowledge framework. Okay, so last but not least, I believe, right? So I want to mention about the secure coding practice quick reference guide. It's also come up by the OWASP as well. So it also defines a set of secure coding practice and a checklist, which is something that you can see whenever you are fulfilling the secure coding practice or not. Because the previous example or the control, right? You cannot validate or you cannot verify whenever the team are following the implementations, or are they secure or not, right? So that's why this OWASP secure coding practice and quick reference guide, there's a checklist format. That means that you might need to check whenever you are fulfilling or not, the secure coding practice or not. In this lecture, right, because it's almost 5:30, so because I also need to mention about the practical test as well, so I cannot go into the details again, but I will also mention like database security and file management in this lecture to let you have a know how you can make use of the checklist to ensure the database security and the file management. So for the secure practice, right, that means that I assume that you might need to, for example, like how you are going to ensure the database security, then someone in your team, right, need to validate, we are using the SORM type parameterized security, and you need to check whenever there's a input validations or output encrypting prevention to make sure that all the meta characters are properly validated or not. If failed, that the command will not be executed. You need to ensure that the variables are shown in type, right? Some of them I would not actually say is a responsibilities of the IS students. But however, SE students should also know how to make use of this checklist to ensure that you are following the secure coding practice or not, because it's all about implementations, right? So one of the most important that I want to mention is the code connection as soon as possible. That means that SC students should check, right? Then whenever they have closed the connection or not in their functions, so they need to check. Otherwise, there will be a lot of open connections which will delay the database performance as well. And then for example, like store procedure and abstract data access to ensure that everything has to be followed in practice, right? Remove or change all the database administrative password, utilize some password or faces, implement multi-factor authentications. So I expect that might be something that you can make use of it to prove that you are actually following the secure coding practice to ensure that your app is secure or not. All right. So, and then for example, like disable any default account and then should connect to the database with different credentials for all the trusted distinction. For example, like read user, read only user, guest administrator as well, which is something that you might need to make use of it to ensure your database security. Same idea for the file management. So why file management is because some of your application might allow the users to upload a file, or actually you need to maintain or secure the file that is stored on your web server, right? Then, for example, like do not pass user supplied data directly to any dynamic include function, then you need to find a way to check it. Require authentications before allowing the file to be uploaded. For example, like file size, file type, and then to see if you allow the users to upload a zip file, right? I believe that Prof. Chen did mention about the zip bomb, right? Thumbs up if you still remember what is zip bomb. Yeah, right. So then, okay, at least there's one thumbs up that is good enough already. So you need to limit those kind of things, right? Then there may be some actually you might need to check the file header as well, and also check the file type alone is not sufficient. And then do not save file in the same web context as the applications to go either to the contact server or into the database. So that means that you need to turn off, so you might need to check it one by one. I don't want to go into the detail because it's too long, don't break. But however, this actually gives you an idea, because you may always ask me, right? So Raymond, how actually I can ensure that my implementation, my coding practice is considered as secure or not? Because you mentioned about the proactive control, you mentioned about the cheat sheet, and you mentioned about the knowledge framework, right? Okay, we follow everything that you mentioned in the previous slides. Then how we are going to validate is that this reference guide is the thing for you to make use of to validate whenever you will still actually consider your implementations is secure or not. So I believe that then your team basically need to check. And I would strongly encourage you have to check, because I just received an email from Arthur, right? One of the team's VM is already under a SSH brute force attack. Okay, so I need to, so I don't know if team 44 is around or not, but just to let you know, in case I forgot later. So your VM actually is under SSH brute force. So I don't know, you need to make your password stronger. Otherwise, if your VM compromised, then I cannot help, then we can only reset, so to say. All right. So this is actually the way that we need to ensure or validate we are following the secure coding practice or implementation. All right. So any questions up to this moment? Any comments, questions from you guys? Thumbs up if no questions, thumbs down if you don't understand anything at all. Cannot see a thumbs down. Okay, then that means that you still understand, right? I hope it's still not complicated enough. All right. So again, still remember the questions, right? I don't know if Prof. Tran mentioned about how to secure your database credential in your applications, right? So because either way, because you're going to store your credential or your API key or some sensitive informations, previously you will only store in your environment configuration file or a text file, right? then actually that we already tell you that you store those in the source code and also in your Git repo, right? Then how can we consider it as a secure? Because then if someone can access your Git repository, then I can still find those credentials. So maybe a solution. So because if you're using, although in this module, we are not using GitHub Actions at all, but however, how we are going to store those secrets or configurations or credentials. In fact, a common practice nowadays is that you will store it into the deployment keys and secrets in the environmental secrets, so that you will not actually store in the configuration file. The configuration file will be still the variables, so that when you actually do the deployment, right, then you need to actually obtain those secret credentials, database credential, API key, DigitalOcean credentials, to actually they need to retrieve from the GitHub Actions, or actually on Jenkins, there's also a system global credential for you to actually store those secrets. This is actually nowadays a common practice for us to store the global credentials, so to say. That means that if I need to access your Jenkins, right? If I see any teams destroying your hard-coded secret, password, API key, email address in your source code or in your configuration file, then maybe in your D2 report, basically I can deduct your mark already, because it is also not considered as secure, right? So I expect that you might need to use Jenkins to store those sensitive credentials instead of storing the plain text in the configuration file, environment files as well. So this is the way nowadays I should expect you to use Jenkins or GitHub to store those credentials or secrets of your DigitalOcean VM, of your database. All right. You guys still with me, right? You know, you understand what I mean, right? I hope you guys are still with me. Okay. So the next thing that I actually need to mention for today is that because we are talking about implementations, right? And I believe that some of the team are using workflows together with actually your implementation is a Docker applications. So also, I want to also make sure that at least you understand it, mainly because in our upcoming lab, you might also need to get familiar with Docker as well. Although we are not forcing it as a compulsory thing for your project, but however, this become a trend for a secure software development is that in your GitHub Actions or your Jenkins workflow, it's not actually only on testing and do the build up your application and do the testing. But however, you might also need to need to consider the deployment as well. So that's why you might also need to include Docker files in your workflow if you're using Docker, because then it might also do the deployment. I don't know, whenever you might have an automated CD workflow to deploy on your DigitalOcean VM automatically, right? That actually is something that that you might also need to consider. So basically develop a Docker application is quite similar to the way that you develop a application without a Docker. So the difference is that if you're using the Docker, right, you are actually deploying and testing your application service running within a Docker containers in your local environment. So the good thing about Docker is that because you can actually do a local testing on your local machine before you push on the GitHub repo as well. So this is something that I want to mention, because some of the team might already ask whenever they can include a workflow of Docker in their CI/CD workflow. So I believe that that will be something that I also want to cover as well in the lectures and in your subsequent lab, right? You will learn how to write Docker files, and also you need to learn how to make use of Docker Compose as well, which as we mentioned, right, it's not compulsory, but however, because this is a lab, right, so I would strongly encourage you to experience on using Docker, especially for SE and IS students. So why we need to mention Docker is because I believe that in your previous lab, we already introduced the concept to execute a Docker image, even from the lab 2, right? When we talk about the secure RAC, the secure requirement tools, the team should already know how to execute a Docker image. So why I want to at least promote, or actually not to encourage, but at least to let you know why it is important, is because it's mainly on the CD as well, which is also equivalent in your implementation phases. So it is actually possible to write the team's own Docker image and simplify the development as well as the development process. So what actually is a Docker file is that it's a test document that contains all the commands that a user could call on the command to build and to compile the servers, or to compile the files that is required for their applications. All right. So again, you will have the experience of Dockerfile and Docker Compose in your upcoming lab. But in these lectures, so that's why I want to mention about you might consider to use Docker Compose so that you can actually define multiple containers of the Docker applications. So what actually is also a text file, a YAML file for actually to define the database, the web application server, or the service, or the components that you require to execute your web applications. So it can actually start all the servers or start your all the containers in just one configuration file, which that's why I want to encourage, if it is the case that the team is considered to use Docker Compose, or actually in the upcoming lab, you might have the experience to use Docker and Docker Compose for if you want to use it for your project as well. But I do understand that we do not have sufficient time, but this will be something that I would also encourage the team to try in the lab. The reason why is because I think for the remaining time, right? So up to this moment, any questions, anything that anyone want to raise? Okay, so that's a question. Is there a way to make Jenkins randomly generate credential every once in a while? I configured a Docker Compose to use the environment variable to share a password between 2 containers, and it's used for internal networking. But I feel like I have to keep those credentials updated manually. I might forget to change it regularly. So again, if it is the case, so actually, yeah, these are extremely good questions, right? So my recommendation is that you might need to the team might need to consider different sets of environment variable or secrets. There should be a separate secret if you're doing the testing, for you to do the testing, and there should be another set for you to do the deployment. So that at least, because we still assume that the testing phase, right, at least it is still under a secure control, or there should be some, at least the team is running locally or either in a controlled environment. So, but however, I would suggest you might have 2 sets or multiple set of environment variables or secrets for your deployment and for your testing phases, all right? But in fact, you can actually generate random values if you use Docker, right? In fact, you can write a shell script to generate a random value as a environmental variable. But I don't know if it will that actually make your configurations or your pipeline a little bit complicated. So that's why I'm not recommending you to use a command to randomly generate a secret or password. All right, I hope I answered your questions. How much is enough to include inside testing stage of Jenkins? I think we are mostly generally new in automated units testing. Okay, so again, this is an extremely good question, right? At least because you have the use case, let's say user registrations and login, right? Because this is what we emphasize in the D2. So we expect at least the login and the registration functions or the forget password or some of the critical functions, at least there should be some kind of automatic testing to ensure that the team is implementing those functions correctly, okay? How much is enough? Okay, the answer, so just to share, at least the login, the user account creation, the forgot password, which we emphasize in the D2. Okay, HyperOffice, do we have to Dockerize our website? Again, I mentioned, right, it is optional for you to Dockerize it because of the time constraint and because we do not have sufficient time to mention Dockerize, Docker, and Docker container in this module as well. But I will not say there will be bonus if you Dockerize it, but however, we will leave it for the team decision whenever they want to Dockerize the thing. The issue is because I do already share to some of the team, right? I'm worried about the performance of our DigitalOcean VM because it only has 4 GB of 4 GB of RAM, right? If you Dockerize everything, I don't know if it has sufficient amount of memory, although some of the teams already configured the swap, at least the Docker will make use of the swap, right? But again, that is actually the performance issue that I also want to raise it to the team so that even there might be some performance issue if you Dockerize and containerize all the things on the limited resource that we provided the team. If we launch after building in Jenkins Docker, is it containerized? Dockerized? You're Dockerizing the Jenkins, but you're not Dockerizing your applications, right? So, but it is always the team's decision, so to say. Any other questions? All right, so if no questions, right? I believe the most important thing for today, because I believe that there's a lot of requests by the other in the last lecture, is about the practical test. So just to remind you, right now it's already almost the end of October. So that means that if you remember what we mentioned in the first lecture, Prof. Chen mentioned, right? So there's a practical test on week 12. So week 12 basically is 17th of November. So so there's a practical test during the lab sections, so to say. So it's a 2.5 hours practical test. So that's actually is within 3 hours of your lab sections. So the first section basically will start in 1:15 to 3:45 p.m. And the second section will start from 4:15 to 6:45 p.m. So basically, make sure you need to come to the time that the lab session that you belongs to. So because you can see the seat limitations, right? So that's why we want to limit. So you need to come into the correct sections instead you go to the different sections. I don't think we have sufficient seat for the lab. That's something that I'm worried. So regarding to the scope, right? So it will be lab 2 and lab 10. From lab 2 to lab 10 is an open book and open internet. So open book and open internet means that actually it's open everything. So you can print everything, you can bring up anything to inside to the practical test sessions. But I think the most important thing that I want to emphasize for the practical test is because we will be using the lab PC to conduct the test. So because starting up the PC actually take quite some time as I'm actually doing some kind of experiments. Some of you might already see me that I'm trying to test the things, right? So I would strongly encourage you to come at least 15 minutes earlier to do the setup and log into the PC. So although we mentioned 1:15, right? I'm okay if you come at around 12:45 so that you can start and log into the lab PCs for better preparations. All right. So make sure you need to come on time and to prepare yourself, because I think why we make it 2.5 hours is we need to make sure that you have time to prepare yourself to start to restart the lab PC, or actually even after the first session, the team actually need the student basically need to restart the lab PC as well. So again, please come a little bit earlier for the practical test. What with the lab PC crash in the midway? Okay, good questions. So that's why that's the second thing that I need to mention. So we're trying to ensure that everything is working for the lab PC. But the second thing I want to also mention is that we allow you to bring your laptop, so to say, aside to assist you. But however, everything basically you need to done on the lab PC, and I strongly encourage you to bring a USB to actually plug into the lab PC so that everything can be stored in your USB. So although I don't want to make it official, but however, a USB thumb drive might help as well. But you can say also the USB thumb drive might crash if the lab PC also crash. But ensure ensure that at least you have prepared for. So Prof, so we can use your laptop for open research. Yes, you can. That's something that I want to also emphasize. You can also use your lab PC, your laptop to assist you to do the practical test as well. But the majority of the work has to be uploaded and submit through the lab PC, because there's some monitoring tools that we are using. So unfortunately, that will be the case. Prof, we need to use ICT Wi-Fi to log into the PC. I believe that you can use student and SIT, the SIT student and SIT, so you don't need to use ICT Wi-Fi credential if it is the case. But you can, I think, before the practical test, make sure that you can still access to the ICT Wi-Fi will be something to prevent any extreme situations. But I think you can still use the student and SIT, I believe. Any other questions? This is the only time that I mentioned about the practical test. Only 118 students here. That means that still 100 plus students don't know about the practical test. Interesting. Should I cut it and then no one will know about it? Cut the recording. I should stop the recording. Anyway. Can tell us how the format is like, because it's starting from lab 2 to lab 10, right? So that means that everything we mentioned in the lab might be covered in the practical test. Prof, is it strictly the lab only, or will other contents will cover strictly lab only? But again, it's open book and open internet, right? So that means that you can still Google technically, right? Prof, any particular lab to focus on? Any hints? Wow, it's too specific already, but seems second half, or at least the things that I cover, right? But I only cover this is only the second week I conduct the lecture. But however, because we talk about the CI/CD things, right? I believe that those are considered as important, so to say. Okay, does the test have SSH? Any SSH? I remember normal SIT Wi-Fi blocks SSH. No worries about the SSH. We will sort the things out. Prof, which record lower weightage? I already give the hint just like the previous one, right? So no worry. If we need to connect SSH, we will ask the PO to unblock SSH. No worry. Prof, which chapter no need to focus? Just joking. Okay. Because I mentioned lab 2 to lab 10, right? I cannot say which is not covered, right? Prof, it's all open-ended questions. It's lab, right? That means there might be something that you need to work on. So it's open-end or non-Googleable, right? But you can still Google. But we allow open book and open internet. That means you can imagine that, yeah, it's an open-end questions. You can bring anything, right? You can have your laptop, as I mentioned, right? Bring fans. I don't know you can bring fans or not, but you bring fans won't help though. Will make your life even more complicated, I believe. Okay, so all right. So I believe there are no more questions, right? Yes, good time to end right today. Any questions or comments about this lecture? So I hope I should already clarify everything by now. I converted my lab Jenkins instance to a Docker Compose because I tried it for entering all parameters to launch a 2 container. Yes, okay, why not? Yeah. If it is actually helping your CI/CD, right? But your Jenkins is also in your pipeline, then you still need another Jenkins to utilize to execute your workflow though. So it's a bit weird to me. Hi, Prof. May I ask, is Docker or Jenkins concept tested? Why so specific? So specific, right? Because we mentioned all the labs being will be covered in the lab, right? That means that might be something that you might need to prepare for. It's lab 2 to lab 10. So you need to figure out what we cover in the lab 2 to lab 10, right? All right. So I believe so I don't want to at least hold those who don't want to stay for longer, right? So thanks for coming today. So again, so you still have 1+ week to work on the project at the D2. So good luck and see you guys tomorrow. Thanks for coming. So need to set up Docker and Jenkins in that computer. Maybe, because if it's related to lab, maybe. Thanks.